Chapter 8. An Audience with Arima. I sat alone in a large Art Deco office whilst looking around nervously at the various computer servers and other sophisticated technology that filled it. Bordering the computer servers were gleaming white marble walls that towered upwards towards a raised ceiling, crowned with a glass dome. The Art Deco architecture created a strange ambience within the office room, making me feel even more unsettled as my body struggled to perspire the corrupt medicine I had ingested hours earlier on the monorail. I struggled to regain a certain degree of awareness after my drug-induced public rejection of the statistical totalitarianism of state utopia and the realization of my new redundant position within the state, which was slowly dawning upon me, that perhaps nothing in my life will ever be the same again. I had publicly, officially rejected the great beta, the great null apodictic hypothesis of the state. I was no longer an endogenous variable, nestled safely, confidently within the great normalized confidence interval of the given known, fixed mean of state utopia's quotas. Nor was I even within the greater realm of classical statistics, within its fixed, yet unknown, mean. I was devoid of a mean. I was no longer part of the state's statistical linear regression model, or of the classical statistics linear regression function. I was no longer part of even classical statistical thinking, of being relative to a fixed unknown mean, or nurtured safely by the state deep within its authorized normalized sigma standard deviations from a given mean. I now felt deeply lost, confused, and vulnerable, unable to even cling to a tangible alternative hypothesis of some new default mindset of being. As the corrupt medicine slowly wore off, I incrementally opened my eyes back to the mundane statistical conformity of the office around me, the very epicenter of state utopia's statistical oppression. The office seemed to be an informal, centralized, informal headquarters. The center of the office was dominated by a sunken floor, complemented by a large, overhead glass dome. Along the walls stood intermittently a few computer servers. Endless statistical code ran down its monitor screens. The myriad of algorithms produced large sets of data and graphs relating to the economic efficiency of state utopia. Some monitors projected the expected economic developments within the convenient enemy of Zhou Pingjun. The doors slid apart as Arima entered the room, unbeknownst to me at that moment, that he was the highest ranked node within state utopia's hierarchy, signified by his quad alpha rating. The rating gave him a near omnipotent position within a state ruled by ratings and statistics, where everyone and everything was quantified and categorized. I turned to see him entering as he stared intently at me whilst he approached. I recognized him vaguely as a significant lobbyist for the Economic Efficiency Act. I knew that he was an influential lobbyist, yet in the flesh he was not very physically impressive, being quite short and puny. As he approached, he seemed to be aware that I was sizing him up, but he had strategically overcompensated for his lack of stature by presenting himself immaculately, crowned with a perfectly gelled back short hair. He approached me deliberately, walking slowly to heighten the anticipation of our meeting, aware of the respect that an alpha node commanded as a member of a government or lobby group. He had walked with an aloofness to create an unapproachable insulation, to protect his position of power at the acme of society, as all the pharaohs, emperors, kings, and presidents have done since antiquity. As he approached, he spoke slowly, enunciating each part of my official security identity with a serious, malicious tone. 31, 4, 28. He then paused, His face broke into a mischievous smile, his tone softened, saying, "Or should I say Bayes? Do you know what brought you here today, Bayes?" asked Arima. "My spurious results, my transgression of the confidence interval, my exogenous routines, my mean, devoid rebellion," I replied. "Yes, partially correct. What took you here today is auto-regression. Take this plant." Arima pointed to a random bonsai tree, one of many neatly stored in rows on a side shelf. "Let's call it YT. It can represent any economic variable, but in this case it represents your current correlation with the state utopia's beta variable. And in the autoregressive model, Y values are deviations from their mean, just like your deviation from your expected mean of monthly confidence interval quotas. Therefore, your YT, your current correlation, exists due to your previous time value correlation with state utopia's beta, plus a current shock, a current stochastic error term, your current rebellious stochastic breakdown," said Arima. "Maybe the stochastic error term shocks are a result of my interaction with the error nodes. Their intangible realized residual terms somehow affected me with their ethereal stochastic essence, or just their unusual thinking, augmenting slightly my open mind, like an inverted auto-regressive process," I considered. "I hypothesize you are a third-order auto-regressive process, because YT, your current correlation, depends on your 3 previous time periods. Mathematically, in this auto-regressive model, all the Y values are dutifully distributed around their mean, unlike your correlations and intentions, Bayes. In these models, only your current correlation, YT, and the 3 previous Y values are involved. No other regressors, therefore it is solely your responsibility, your data, your routines that determine this result. You have only yourself to blame. Moving average processes have also affected your thinking and routines in this model. YT is equal to a constant white noise, stochastic error term. YT is equals a constant plus a moving average of the current and past error terms. I assume, again, your YT follows a third-order moving average process. Perhaps rebellious nodes you met over previous periods. Perhaps even possible error node that may have assisted you during your recent altercation in the park, which you may have not reported. Therefore, so far, I use my favorite econometric forecasting model, the ARMA, PQ, auto-regressive moving average process, to analyze and infer your statistical activity and subsequent loyalty to state utopia. We usually assume all linear regressions routines and thinking within state utopia's time series to be weakly stationary, the mean and variance being constant. But sometimes a series will become stubbornly non-stationary, integrated. The trend can move away from the mean moving far out of any stochastic bands or standard deviations expected possibly to never return, nor pass the mean frequently. Non-stationary time series results, such as your current 3-period routines, which were classified as random, stochastic, from the perspective of the linear regression model. Yet to me, who is experienced with specific rebellion against state utopias, given, known, fixed, mean, and expected time series routines and implied thoughts, I can infer that you are merely exhibiting non-stationary integrated processes. We can cure you, though. That is the good news, Bayes. We will difference your times series data and implied thinking, taking 3 times differencing to make you once again stationary. Bayes, I shift the confidence interval quotas and stationary process of the beta trend to whatever gradient I decide, just like central banks did throughout the age of finance with their interest rates. Yet I influence the great socio-economic beta of state utopia with the official selection bias of the linear regression function, which should always evolve with a predictable stationary process to satisfy the Economic Efficiency Act, which removes all uncertainty from the socio-economic beta model with aggregate demand conformity. I guide and smooth the trends of the beta process with biased engineered socio-economic events and expected data realizations through the monthly confidence interval quotas. Sometimes there is rational behind my influence, my subtle exogenous shocks to the system, disguised in endogenous official quotas, and sometimes it's merely a whim with a touch of malice. The usual discretion of a hidden dictator. Arima smiled. Decreasing rations, increasing interest rate debt on short-term loans, decreasing interest on savings, accounts, floating the fiscal policy, increasing money supply at the central bank, decreasing rations. But now I merely control the state's aggregate demand curve, therefore the money supply. Interest rates and engineered rescission rationing are not necessary. Changing public sentiment, forcing nodes to accept more expected irrational opinions of social norms to corrode society with nonsense, more rights for the ambidextrous, more inclusion for the ambidextrous nodes. Why should only the left-handed or the right-handed have all the opportunities? Then, over a few financial quarters, I can make the ambidextrous social pariah, all with the shift of the confidence interval, all with the stroke of a pen, concluded Arima. You say that I am suffering from non-stationary processes, yet you create shocks to the beta. You make it a non-stationary process too. How is my integrated thinking and non-stationary routines wrong? Yet yours is right, I asked. Because Bayes, it's all about reference points. A non-stationary process is not non-stationary if there is no other trend to compare it to. So, my stationary process is the beta, the primary trend, with no other reference point. But the node's reference point is always compared to the utopian state's beta, comprised of its countless statistical quotas, e-graphs, expected data, and trend lines. The more quotas, the more constraints the nodes must try to be stationary relative to my reference trend line, to whatever I set that reference trend to be. Statistics is not all about setting parameters of sample, means, and choosing the correct trends and forecasts, augmenting and inferring with official biased observers. Statistical totalitarianism helps to co-integrating the nodes further, more so than just the expected confidence interval quotas, means and standard deviation. The co-integration protects them from the stochastic, chaotic turbulence of their imperfect subconscious. The nodes harboring inefficiencies of individual reason, will, imagination, and perceptions of truth, tempting them to be free of the great statistical guiding hand, said Arima. Arima relaxed his tone, changing the subject. It has been many years since you first were added to our database, he said, almost reminiscing. We monitored your advancement throughout your education and career. You have developed sufficiently. We have been a guiding hand since the inception. We have looked after you, over and above state utopia's nurturing. We even included you in our database of potential alphas. It is a pity that things have come to this, for us to meet like this. But unfortunately you have not restricted your thoughts and actions appropriately as you always have done, said Arima. You knew I was restricting my thoughts, I replied in shock. Oh, yes, Arima replied. We have known everything about you. But why did you not do anything before? I questioned. It is part of the process. For you to reach a higher level, they all go through the inevitable transitional period, Arima replied. What do you mean, they? I asked, shocked. Most of the beta nodes prior to being promoted to the alpha caste first have to come to terms with all the little nasty truths of our society before they can fully appreciate the genius of state utopia. At first, most of them fight it, but eventually they all accept it. This wonderful state, Arima replied theatrically, waving his arms around. Arima then paused, adding, utopia, enunciating the term almost sarcastically, as if he himself did not even believe in state utopia, but expected every node to be devoted to every aspect of its running. It's all part of maturing, seeing the light, the glorious, synchronized, economically efficient state. State utopia, continued Arima. You are not special bays. Arima gave a slight patronizing sigh. There have been many like you before, all experiencing this type of social withdrawal. But that can't be, I exclaimed in frustration, my identity and reality slowly starting to peel away. I paused, then continued. You mean I am not unique? There are many out there just like me. Carbon copies. Some specific category of node, I stated with a controlled, emotionless, rhetorical confirmation. I am afraid so. It is all part of the social development program that all potential promoted alphas must go through to become truly enlightened, replied Arima. We cannot be blind to the truth. We need to know how everything from all points of view, even from the oppressed position, so we can continue to manage the state. The potential alpha needs to be aware of the full symmetrical spread of the normalized distribution of reality, not just our constrained, nurturing confidence interval of monthly state quotas reality, but the all-encompassing reality of being a node existing in whatever society they find themselves in, said Arima. But I no longer want to manage the state. State utopia is too biased, too ruthless, I replied passionately. Come now, Bays. Too biased, too ruthless, Arima replied in a patronizing tone, his face screwing up in momentary disgust. You sound like an idealistic student, Arima continued. Is that the best you can do, after all the education and training we have given you? He questioned in disgust. State utopia is too statistical, too fixed, too many known given quotas, too certain, therefore too predictable, too rational and efficient, too selfish and unfair, too restrictive, too biased, too ruthless, I replied in a more confident tone which only a true believer could muster. It is too ruthless, Arima replied sarcastically, enunciating each word, exposing the malicious side of his personality, his face again contorted in momentary disgust, before quickly falling back into its default superficial pleasant smile and inquisitive stare. Being selfless, that is irrational, he continued this time, his voice filled with his own emotion and conviction. To be selfish, to want a better life, to be ruthless, that is the rational way, Arima continued. Is the confidence interval genocide of the redundant nodes rational? Aren't you ashamed of that rational? I asked accusingly. No, shouted Arima adamantly, his expression edged with a vicious grimace as his spittle sprayed from his mouth. He paused. His tone softened. I think the confidence interval is evolution. Arima's expression then switched to a friendly smile with a tone of empathy. Look around you, its nature bays. Everywhere you look there is evolution. It is logical, ruthless, the very nature of biology and mathematics. The rational choices that you make determine your success. It is woven into the very fabric of nature. Look at mathematics, Fibonacci ratios, game theory, physics, biology, statistics. Unless you take the correct course of action in each niche, you will fail. It is evolution's way of rewarding the selfish, the rational. So why should the superorganism, the utopian state, not be similar? Do you think I or any of the alphas enjoy setting confidence interval termination quotas? No, that is why we get the augmenter to do it. It takes strength to do bad things. He realized he had made a Freudian slip by saying bad things. He immediately amended his speech by adding to the end of his sentence the phrase, "tough decisions," he continued. Because leaders who make tough decisions. He paused to be dramatic. It was an old habit he used in his political lobbying speeches, still have a conscience. There is an element of empathy which has to be overcome in order to do these terrible things. Again he slipped up. He amended his sentence by adding, "difficult actions." He continued once again, "But as long as these difficult actions create lasting positive results, then is it not righteous to—" He concluded inquisitively. Arima continued jokingly, "That is why we use statistical algorithms and artificial intelligence, so we do not have to deal directly with all the tough decisions, and that is also why the root-down hierarchy is advantageous to us, because we can just outsource all the difficult actions down the hierarchy." He smiled, proud of his political rhetoric that conveniently glossed over any wrongdoing, almost seducing any listener into becoming a compliant adherer to anything, he said. Arima continued, "Normalization is that bad when a node is near the mean. The average? Yes, it is boring being average. You never excel at anything, but you never fail at anything either. So there is some security in that fact, which is an important virtue if you have a family to provide for." Arima then stopped talking for a moment and gestured to me to follow him through another sliding door, which led outside into a wonderful garden, which stretched on for many hundreds of meters in all directions. It was filled with nature's wonders, beautiful vegetation, colored flowers, dark blue, red, orange, yellow, and every color and shade in between, as well as many different exotic and indigenous trees and bushes. The trees all seemed to be ordered into perfect geometric sequences, the lines flowing into each other. Hundreds of perfectly straight rows, all seemed to merge into one. The beauty of nature, coupled with an ordered symmetrical geometry. I reflected that it was the type of garden that a personality like Arima would appreciate. I even concluded it was the type I liked too. Arima broke the silence. "Come, let's walk for a while and get some fresh air," as he knew I liked to stroll and think. I was glad to see the open sky over my head again and feel temporarily free. As we walked deeper into the garden, I noticed a row of perfectly arranged bushes, trimmed similar to a bonsai tree. Arima noted my interest, saying, "These trees are my favorite. I spend many hours per week here, pruning my bushes." We made our way into a large wooden furnished garden patio. We both sat down, admiring the row after row of trees. In between us stood a solitary potted bonsai tree upon a table. He continued his speech, justifying the ruthlessness of the state. He pointed to a potted bonsai tree on the table. He then caressed the leaves, saying, "A bonsai tree. It is methodically over time preened and trimmed of its leaves and branches, forced to grow into the direction that the horticulturalist wants." The bonsai tree is unaware of the horticulturalist and unaware of his discretion for the tree to grow in a particular direction. The horticulturalist can change his mind any time. He can cut back any of the branches to whatever direction he wants the tree to grow. The bonsai tree is perhaps aware of the cutting and the general direction that it is being forced to grow to. Perhaps the tree can feel the pain of the scissors cutting through its branches. Maybe even the bonsai tree cries out a silent scream. Who knows? But it does not matter, as the bonsai tree is trapped in its pot, in the soil, on the desk of the horticulturalist. At his mercy, the little tree can only grow in the direction that he prunes it to grow. It cannot even wither and die because it is constantly nurtured by the horticulturist. Just like the bonsai tree, the young unbiased brain is full of synapses and nerves, growing in a particular direction, depending on what it learns from its originators and the society that natures it. The unbiased is also vulnerable, like the bonsai tree. At the mercy of the nurturing parent originators, and society finds itself in soaking up the information, just like the little tree, soaking up the nutrients from the soil in its pot. The unbiased is not aware of the controlling, guiding influence of the parent originator and society. It just accepts the preening it receives, similar to an unbiased receiving a slap when it's naughty. Like the bonsai tree, perhaps, feeling the pain of the scissors cutting through the branches. The unbiased and the endogenous nodes collectively are like the bonsai tree. They are unaware of the invisible guiding hand of the economically efficient state. Even if the sigma were aware of the guiding hand, they are powerless to do anything, just like the harmless unbiased or the trapped inanimate bonsai tree. They cannot fight back. All they can do is just accept the constant methodical trimming of the invisible guiding hand of the state. He finished. Arima then continued. The endogenous nodes have different sigma caste salary bands, which most keep this for life. They are even content with their ratings. Society is just a collection of highly correlated nodes. Any individual, unique nodes, when magnified statistically enough, resemble a single scalar. They are all near identical. Their infinitesimal differences become insignificant, even though individually they exhibit all different variables and weightings regarding their financials and intellectual specifics. From the alpha to the sigma ratings, the wealthiest to the poorest, they are all just nodes. Each node an individual brain cell making up a unified collective singular consciousness. A single brain. He paused with a cheeky grin, adding, a single bonsai tree, whilst he lifted his two fingers, making a cutting motion. The alpha. Engineer the future parameters for the different sigma castes. Through social engineering and biased breeding, the state can direct the collective DNA sequence of different sigma castes' offspring, pruning the unbiased minds to have a certain intelligence, strength, height, and even appearance, he continued. Negative qualities are bred and conditioned into most of the sigma nodes unbiased to make things fairer for the whole of society. Negative qualities, such as laziness, low attention span, propensity to commit petty crimes only during adolescence. This gives the higher sigma nodes unbiased engineered advantages in life by corroding the lower caste sigma. The nodes are subtly preened, nurtured in specific neighborhoods, sent to certain schools. Lower castes, unbiased, are sent to inferior schools and are not taught, as well as the more privileged unbiased. This creates sigma, standard deviations from the mean of the linear regression function, yet these differences are balanced out. The unbiased sigma's whole life is mapped out for them by state utopia's statistical quotas of the Economic Efficiency Act. They are given specific choices in life, but there really is no choice. You can choose the very unpleasant choice or the slightly unpleasant choice. The choice is yours, he said, smiling sarcastically. Are our brains not just machines that continually make choices, every moment of our lives, conscious and subconscious? Do we not navigate through the unrealized probability spectrum of the nearly future, making countless choices which results in us being who and what we are today? For ourselves, our unbiased and associated nodes, concluded Arima. Not much of a choice, not much of a freedom when everything is owned in the state. Every bit of land, every house, every tree, every blade of grass. Having to accept the menial choices that we are given. To be grateful for those limited options, I replied, annoyed by Arima's overly positive tone. The node will obviously choose the rational choice, the option with the highest payoff, the slightly less unpleasant choice, the choice of working in a supermarket their whole life, as opposed to the only other option offered, working as a cleaner in a sewerage works, I replied. We even complicate matters worse by transforming nodes into becoming competing nodes, and therefore having to choose the dominant strategy, accepting a lower cooperative payoff, laughed Arima, almost childishly, enjoying my disdain. I added a hidden further augmentation behind the average monthly confidence interval setting. I added a moving average with an autoregressive to further constrain and augment the nodes, whose routines individually and collectively are integrated trends. Therefore, these integrated nodes, who are usually regarded as being stationary, always obediently crossing the mean regularly, a mean that I set, whose trends and being is random, stochastic, at best chaotic. I therefore accept their integrated non-stationary nature. I therefore add additional hidden, autoregressive, integrated moving averages to complicate the quotas further. Ultimately, the nodes are guided their entire lives from the cradle to the coffin into making small, discrete choices all the time, which is carefully crafted by state utopia. Each binary choice, chosen, perhaps corrodes away marginally their dignity, dreams, and fading youth. Ultimately, their untapped, limitless, intrinsic potential wasted away, ending up working away their lives in a menial job they detest. An unbiased mind is open and soaks up its environment unquestioningly. If the unbiased asks any questions, then it is up to the parents to decide what is the correct way in which to do something, and what is not the correct way. The unbiased just accepts their answer as the truth. Just like an unbiased mind that is open and accepts unquestionably from the originator, so do the sigma, who just accept what the state tells them. Even the alpha comply too. The unbiased are augmented and conditioned from birth to just accept the reality and ideas presented to them by their parents, concluded Arima. The state should offer a wider, freer spectrum of chooses, not create a perpetual statistical constraint. They should choose how to live as they desire, not to merely exist in a matrix of perpetual statistical quotas and debt, while spawning the next generation of taxpayers, I replied. All choices inevitably enslave, replied Arima with an uncharacteristic, genuine, somber expression which shocked me as it seemed to contain a deep, hidden, truthful wisdom. Bays, the funnel of the Metkin, Nepenthes pitcher plant, which is similar to a Venus flytrap, allows a bee into its funnel, but once inside the bee is trapped. It tries in vain to escape by flying towards a light which shines through the translucent, fleshy walls of the pitcher's funnel trap. But the bee cannot get out. Ironically, all it had to do was fly downwards to escape through the curved downwards facing funnel. Yet it keeps flying upwards towards the light of the translucent walls of the pitcher's plant, with the light filtering through. Eventually the bee becomes exhausted and falls into the fluid at the bottom of the funnel and drowns and is consumed by digestive enzymes. It does not even know that it has been trapped and consumed by a virtually inanimate organism. It is unaware of all that. It can only follow its nature, its visual instinct. It is strange that somehow the pitcher plant's design knew this and grew that way. Or was it just pure chance of evolution? I muttered. There is no room for a creator or providence in state utopia, only the official inferences of the statistical quotas and ideology. You know that Bayes, replied Arima arrogantly. Bayes, the funnel is like state utopia's statistical quotas, which augments them, allowing them to follow their Bayesed, predictable, intrinsic, primitive instincts, coupled with the limited choices they are presented with. They will keep moving into the direction of the pseudo-light, to whatever is continually presented on their monitor, until they are vanquished, yet never considering choosing an alternative, counterintuitive direction, said Arima. Arima looked directly at me, then pointed his finger up to the sky, saying, Covariance. It's like the birds that flock together. They are all grouped together in a big scattered silhouette made up of all the birds choosing to fly in the same general direction. The silhouette writhes, undulates, and pulsates above in the sky. Yet collectively all the birds choose to follow a common invisible path as they follow the pattern it leads them to rise and fall, to zigzag, to and fro. But ultimately, they all follow the same trend, an overall definitive direction. This covariance, raising his voice and continuing Arima, is a collective aggregate movement, the movement of the flock. In the flock, each bird feels free to soar a bit higher or a bit lower than the neighboring birds. But ultimately the direction of the flock is controlled, directed by a common will, or maybe an alpha bird, the invisible hand. Let's just say a controlling influence. An influence ultimately on the minds of the flock. The reason why I am telling you this, that is the genius of how to control a flock, or a group, or a society, is that you create the illusion that the individual has a free will, as well as the entire flock, that this alone is driving them in a particular direction, each moment. But in reality it is not the individual or even the combined group that is driving them in a particular direction. It is the influencer who is. As the primary biased inferer, I influence the model prior to the event by setting certain variables within the sample set environment which we control. We control the transportation infrastructure, the mortgages, The interest rate, the unemployment rate, everything bays. And the Sigma chooses the most rational choice that we present them with. They think they are free to decide, but they are not. He laughed again. Said Arima. So, nodes are mere covariant birds to you, I replied. Oh no, Bays, replied Arima. They are not even that. Birds are free when they fly to a certain extent. No, Bays. The nodes are just farm animals, cattle. They sleep where we allow them to sleep. They eat what we allow them to eat. They go where we allow them to go. And they own what we allow them to own. And guess what? They even think and feel what we allow them to think and feel. They are just lobotomized cattle, vital flesh that manufactures and maintains the infrastructure of the state, infrastructure that we need. Bays, do you think global monorails just appear out of nowhere? No, Bays. We need endogenous nodes for that. Do you think luxury goods make themselves? No. We need Sigma for all these wonderful things in society. A society that we get first pick of. Each time. Finished off Arima, with a satisfied smile. They think it is out of rational necessity that they make certain decisions, such as getting up at a certain time, collectively, that they all start work at a certain time, collectively. Yet, they are only making rational choices that the system has given them, and then statistics creates only a few certain choices, and that are accepted by the herd. They then make rational decisions based on the limited choices presented to them by the system. A controlling influence decide if the group flies up or the group flies down. Usually the control or persuasion of the masses is done by a dictator or by the lure of money. The endogenous nodes get up every day and travel to work. They work, and by working they turn the wheels of state utopia. The state spins because of the working Sigma. Things are made because endogenous nodes got up and contributed by making them. Money, military oppression, or even a centralized totalitarianism is not needed. All that is needed is to persuade the Sigma that they must work. Yes, you were right, Bays. Society does not need money to function. Arima said, in a loud, forceful manner, yet with a thoughtful expression, whilst conceding to my point. Society and the Sigma do not need money or a strict government to have a fruitful and beneficial society, I stated. If each node had the maturity and honor to accept their caste, their role in society, that destiny or themselves have chosen, then money as an incentive is not needed. Governmental control is not needed. Even the sacred statistical control is not needed. I was filled with a belief, as the passion in my tone indicated. No, all that is needed is altruism, a benevolent, good-natured spirit that nodes will help each other and even work for each other, for the good of each other, for the good of society. Out of necessity, the Sigma will pull together in times of uncertainty, such as a power cut. All the Sigma come out of their apartments and offer each other candles and tea, when normally their neighbors would hardly speak to each other for years. What happens is the nodes no longer adhere to their normal routines and patterns, asked Arima. He continued, they are then free. They are no longer fixed variables in the confidence interval. They become stochastic variables, random, free, unpredictable, even to themselves. They are free to surf the probability spectrum, the normalized graph of all probabilities in their lives. They could easily float out of the confidence interval and no longer be financially efficient. They would be free to possibly experience extreme standard deviations from the norm. They could experience and learn new amazing things, good and bad. If you do the same thing every day, you will experience the same things every day. This way we are protecting the financial system and indirectly the good of society. This way we shield the average node from extreme probabilities that are negative and hurtful to them. A node will never have to worry about his parachute not opening, as the node is not allowed to parachute, said Arima. But does that not thwart the extreme good, positive possibilities as well? I asked. Adhering to statistical incentive is the only way. Clear, transparent, and simple. It gives the alphas something to hide behind, as the sigma nodes are presented with a statistical quota, form their immediate superiors, line managers in their relative root-down hierarchy, and they just do it. The sigma nodes focus on their statistical prerequisite and work targets, and not the alphas setting the statistics. The alphas have their orders transformed into statistical directives embedded in the state's economic efficiency policy, enticing the sigma nodes to perpetually marginally slowly inch forward. They are manipulated every day to get up, work, and consume, said Arima. Even the alphas are caught up in the continual expansion of the capitalist economy, a perpetual compounding of consumption and production. The alphas are also doomed, as they too have to continually inching further, consuming more, adhering to their ever-increasing economic efficiency targets, until even they are set firmly and irrevocably onto the road to perdition of unsustainable production and consumption of the world's resources and the continual erosion a node's social utility and freedom. The alphas are also just nodes. They too are victims of the statistics, the economic efficient society which they created and now worship. They do not even realize it, and if they did, it is too late. They are trapped in a system of their own making. The only difference between the alphas and the sigma nodes is that the alphas have more possessions and perceived utility, I concluded. Arima continued more seductively. Come join us, and you will benefit from the wonderful new world that we have forged through wars and clever socio-economic evolution. Or we can always put you on the Arcadian Express. It makes no difference to us, but you are enlightened enough to know our ways, and it would be a shame to lose you. Arima continued. The system? The state? Statistical algorithms? AI? Technology? Knowledge? All leads to an unstoppable evolution. This systemic knowledge-based society is a machine. No, a dinosaur. A massive, slow, moving dinosaur. It keeps marching bays, right over you, and even me. It marches on and on and on, no matter what you say or do. You can throw yourself in front of the juggernaut. You can stand in the dinosaur's way. You clutch onto its huge, thick, rough leg, bays. You can even try to whisper in its ear and plead with it, bays. Arima paused. Arima then shouted passionately, You can scream to it, bays, but it will not stop. No, bays, not even for one moment. It will methodically plod on, with you screaming, still clutching onto its leg. It will simply continue to march on, bays, with your bloody trampled body under its huge, indifferent hooves. Or bays. Arima paused and contorted a small wry smile to strengthen the conclusion. He deepened his voice, his tone becoming more passionate. You can ride up on top of the dinosaur, high up above the masses, the insignificant nodes, the nodes, The statistics. Bayes. The nameless, faceless statistics, high up on the shoulders of the beast. His tone implied an assumed bond of closeness, trying to seduce an acceptance from me. If only I would compromise my principles and accept the offer. Arima carried on. The view is magnificent up here, Bayes. Come join me. Don't be silly. I don't think I can co-integrate with you or the great utopian state anymore, but you are right in am now non-stationary and definitely meaningless. I am free of the great dinosaur, I said, relieved and resigned to my fate. My mind now is free to roam the stochastic probability spectrum and to contemplate, I stated. I am wondering, what were you before you became the highest alpha node in the state? I asked curiously. I wanted to be a quant for a hedge fund, yet ended up as a computer technician, working on the augmenter. It was a good job, and I had a relative position in the state as an employee of the Ministry of Information, programming the augmenter supercomputer's statistical algorithms, replied Arima. Yet one day I realized if I could manipulate the augmenter software, I could promote myself to higher and higher ranks within the state. Any rivals, such as a more senior technician, with one illegal stroke of the computer keypad, they were reclassified as a redundant node and would be sent an invitation to Arcadian. A bit like your job, no, said Arima, smirking. No, I paused. We had rules, guidelines. I stopped to think deeper. We merely administered the nodes who had, through by their own actions, fell outside the confidence interval. Whatever Bayes, whatever, said Arima, dissatisfied with my weak answer. I looked down with shame. Then as I began to look up, I noticed that one bonsai tree was burnt with a section missing from one of its rounded sides. Arima noticed me looking inquisitively. That bonsai tree was burnt by a lightning strike. That side will never grow back. It is a bit like a damaged brain, I paused. Or a damaged personality, I replied as I looked at Arima, who noted the insinuation. What kind of damaged personality? Inquired Arima. It looks like a narcissistic personality. Arima's face screwed up with narcissistic rage, saying aggressively, I don't think you have been listening to what I have been saying. The old ways of money and personal contacts were extinct. The powerful nodes were shocked to be usurped so effortlessly, no matter how powerful their positions in society, because they are all submissive to the state's statistical conformity via the augmenter. The irony is that although it seems that I was an interloper to the traditional power structure, and therefore did not deserve the power and privilege that I accrued by deceitful ways, however, the truth is no one deserves disproportionate power and privilege of the alphas, which were, in most cases, is taken in dishonorable ways, if not in the present generation, then certainly by their ancestors. You are different to past dictators, more subtle, more intellectual, yet similar, ruthlessly eliminating your rivals. Previous dictators used political revolutions, but you merely hide behind technology, the augmenter supercomputer which is tasked to run the economic efficient society, I replied. I could not have put it better myself. I concur. I use technology and the financial markets to acquire power rather than the more conventional militarism, but ultimately all dictators hide behind something. Ideology, military power, or economic systems. The important ingredient is whatever method adopted. The nodes blindly follow a root-down hierarchy which is controlled. In a structured society, the node in a uniform or office immediately above another node in the hierarchy is told to conform because it is. He paused. Official, he smirked. I feel strangely devoid of any known or unknown fixed mean. I feel devoid of a mean, distribution, or any trend. I therefore think I can never again accept this utopian state of a fixed given known means and contrived stagnant distributions, all to prop up abased, apodictic null hypotheses of the state, I stated resolutely. That is a pity then, Bayes, replied Arima. I will have to accept that is your final answer, as a potential alpha node and previous endogenous beta node of the Ministry of Inferences. Now, you are nothing but an exogenous node. I have tried to persuade you to see reason and return you to the nurturing mean of the utopian state and pursue your ambition of becoming an alpha node. But now I must end our debate, as there are many responsibilities to take care of, Arima concluded, whilst flashing a smirk. As Arima was about to leave, I allowed myself one last defiant comment. I assume your name means auto-regressive integrated moving average, I said thoughtfully. Yes, Bayes, well done. Integrated meaning that the trend line moves significantly away from the mean, and does not pass it often, I continued. Yes, agreed Arima. Integrated or non-stationary movement can even travel an unlimited distance from the mean, I added. I suppose so, replied Arima. Like your thoughts, I replied. Arima realized the insinuation that his thoughts were integrated, rambling, mad. He became agitated at the insult, most probably because it contained a certain degree of truth. So, Bayes, you think that you are good and I am bad, along with the terrible state. You think, because you were constrained within the statically harmony of the state's Economic Efficient Act, where you could do no harm, that you are harmless. Yet when you had a mental breakdown, where there is no longer any limits, then you were no longer harmless. Now you try to follow and act on your convictions, of your grand, statistical, free, harmonious ideology. But you are not good. Did you visit the sick or care about the hungry? You only cared about your pension and your all-important promotion into the alpha ship, into the power that makes the utopian state. How is that good? Accused Arima. You are a hypocrite, shouted Arima. Perhaps, but you are mad. You seem unbalanced. You are not impartial like the other empty alpha. You seem to enjoy the ruthlessness of the state, I replied. You call me mad when you are the one that had the breakdown, screamed Arima. Bayes, I integrate. I am the trend. I am the mean. I can shift the mean. If there are two trend lines, I am the independent-based trend line, which the other co-integrated trend line has to mirror, has to copy, in order to remain co-integrated. If I add an exogenous shock, if I add an integrated movement into the underlying based independent trend line, then the node's trend line, the dependent trend line, has to also immediately incorporate the shock, immediately integrate. If I change the mean, then the node's trend line has to shift to adapt to remain stationary. Therefore my will, my whims, my intentions are exogenous shock. I am the system. I am the state's will. Without following my thoughts, intentions, actions, you are falling outside of the confidence interval, becoming non-stationary, becoming non-co-integrated. Therefore the nodes, thoughts, actions, routines, intentions, their very consciousness, their very perceptions of reality around them, is all relevant to the statistical trend lines which their data produces with the confidence interval quotas expectations demand. Therefore, I control their expectations, I control their statistical routines, I control their thoughts, their intentions, their actions, I control their consciousness, I control their perception of reality, I control their very souls. If I, the state, believed in souls. I am the state, Bayes, Arima stated. Maybe you are mad, Arima. Auto-regressive integrated. I paused to give integrated more weighting. Moving average, I replied. Perhaps you are mad, I concluded. No, Bayes. Even if I am mad, I am sanity incarnate. I am the mean. I am the underlying independent base trend. I am the idealized norm. I set the norm. I set the mean. I set the underlying line base trend, which sanity and insanity is compared to. And even if I am mad, even if there are exogenous shocks added to the system, they are my exogenous shocks, and the utopian state, and the system and the nodes and their perceptions need to co-integrate around those exogenous shocks. Therefore, Bayes, I am sane, you are mad, you are the exogenous node, you are non-stationary, you are integrated, you are non-co-integrated, you are meanless. We have monitored you. We monitored your thoughts, your actions, your intentions, your routines. You have evolved from being a complaint beta node who adhered to the statistical quotas in the Economic Efficiency Act. You then morphed. You evolved into a classical statistical, slightly freer, slightly more stochastic node. But then you become meanless. You became devoid of a mean, devoid of any statistical ideology, any statistical inferences. But we will regress you back into the harmonious mean, the mean of the utopian state, where you can once again co-integrate as a stationary sigma, node, protected and nurtured by the state, replied Arima. In relation to the utopian state's beta, I questioned. A beta linear regression function, realized solely from your biased expectations placed at each sample point. Your biased trend lines and quotas, which is modified to your whims. Perhaps you are non-stationary. Perhaps the primary reference point, the beta, is non-stationary. Then my rationale thinking is not co-integrated with the non-stationary beta of your whims, I continued. Therefore, in order for an average sigma node to feel confident within their compliance and to be stationary, they would have to be co-integrated with your fluctuating beta, non-stationary trends and processes. Yet within the great beat, you hypocritically let a stationary trend line and the constant reference points be the perceived as an unbiased organic morphing trend, the pseudo-eyes of statistical truth. Then you integrate that trend movement, which will deviate from the expected natural organic stationary trend line progression of your previous beta trend line and quotas, infected with a tainted previous time period trend, infected with a stochastic exogenous shock, error term, your mad malicious whim, added to the great beta linear trend line, to the statistical quotas, a subtle negative externality, a hidden power, hidden behind the system, as in countless times and situations throughout posterity. This is unfair to a complaint, confident, mean-thinking statistical quota, accepting average, compliant endogenous sigma node, who tries to co-integrate within the perceived constant reference point of the great beta trend line, the pseudo-unbiased eyes of truth. Yet the beat trend is non-stationary, integrated movement, so a co-integrating sigma node, who is statically obligated to have stationary movement, cannot co-integrate with your non-stationary reference points in the beta trend line, I concluded. Yes, like Einstein's general relativity, where a node is within an accelerating elevator. How can they detect gravity? Replied Arima. My non-stationary, integrated, random walk, meanless thinking, swings wildly and persistently away from any given mean, in all directions. Yet perhaps it is negatively correlated to your unjust, irrational, integrated whims, which are masked behind a stationary process veneer of the accepted beta linear regression trend. Perhaps my negatively correlated non-stationary process tends to hedge out your non-stationary exogenous malicious willful shocks, hedging the beat into a twin asset portfolio, my relative confidence interval compliance correlation, and to the other variable, the utopian state's beta, influenced by your exogenous whims. Perhaps I hedge my micro-personal relationship with the beta portfolio, hedging, regressing, and augmenting my consciousness closer towards the unbiased, constant, non-stationary, towards the true statistical ethereal reference point of truth, logic, reason, morals, logos of the true statistical reality, the mean of means, reality incarnate within probability, the unbiased eyes of truth that all our subconscious sees through, even through our tainted higher conscious of ego, based reasoning and ideologies. I am closer to it than you, whose irrational selfish whims taint society as with all dictators throughout history, I replied passionately. I added, Arima, you only seem to be preoccupied of the minus sign. Your great mathematical symbol, it seems it should be the official symbol of the utopian state, not the normalized confidence interval. Why do you say that Bayes? Asked Arima, even though his patience threshold was almost reached. Because all you do is minus all data. Even adding distributed lagged variables is minus autocorrelation. Minus exogenous variables to create restricted models, minus the error terms, minus white noise, minus the redundant nodes, minus all variables that does not fit into your expectations and ultimately your will, minus the A plus A Z values which fall outside the confidence interval, minus A Z values from the model, therefore minus altruism, genius, spontaneity, stochastic possibilities minus spirituality. I stopped. I did not mention the mysterious, statistically significant great plus sign. Arima, your will, and the utopian states all seem to be the antithesis of any positive value. Merely a perpetual negative, a great minus sign. With that, Arima made a gesture to the guard standing nearby in the doorway. He then turned around, leaned forward, hunching over a computer terminal screen, and began to analyze some arbitrary data as the guards escorted me out of the control room. I was taken downstairs to a waiting military lorry. I was placed in the back with some stone-faced soldiers who sat staring mindlessly ahead, not even acknowledging me as I had boarded the military lorry. They seemed like lifeless mannequins. I wondered what they were thinking, if they thought at all, as they were trained to do. Not think. The sergeant, after issuing some orders to the guards, turned to me and said without emotion, resembling an android speaking, "You will be taken to a holding facility. Do not try to escape." With that, the sergeant turned around on his heels, just like an oversized toy robot, and disappeared towards the front of the lorry. I was now resigned to my fate of becoming a redundant node, after rejecting Arima's offer. As the lorry methodically ambled through the different streets and neighborhoods, intermittently careening and bouncing off different obstacles and narrow roads, I remained nestled in between two burly soldiers. I was resigned to my fate. I was even free to think without a mean now. I considered Arima to be the ultimate wolf, the greatest wolf of the utopian root-down caste hierarchy, the alpha nodes being the wolves. Yet he was too cunning to be classified as a wolf. He was more a fox. As he would not challenge them directly, another wolf of the alpha hierarchy, yet instead the little Arima. Previously a lower-ranking node would use the one great societal power, an invisible force, to hide behind and dispatch each of the challenging wolves who snarled metaphorically at him within the government and corporate arena. Dominant wolves simplistically and predictably challenged and snarl at each other, focusing on the immediate wolves who challenged them. While Arima, the little fox, hid behind the supercomputer, the augmenter, and manipulated the system, the personal statistical quotas and confidence interval, thereby secretly eliminating any challenging alpha node wolf who predictably and obedient submitted to the utopian state's statistical conformity unquestioningly.